So a few months ago, I gave a small rant about how I wasn't the biggest fan of Citizen watches. I didn't like how big they were and how cluttered their dials looked, plus I felt that equidrive movements were kinda plain and boring. So in some ways, I'm just describing this Citizen Promaster Nighthawk that I have right here. I actually bought this watch back in 2019, and then I sold it in 2020, and then I bought it again just a few weeks ago. So why did I end up buying this watch a second time? Well, let's find out in today's review of the BJ7000-52E. So a bit of background information about this watch. This is part of the Promaster series, which are Citizen's tool watches. It's kind of like the counterpart to Seiko's Prospects lineup in that they have watches pertaining to air, land, and sea. The Promaster Nighthawks are part of the aviation lineup, so these are your pilot watches. There are modern versions of the Promaster Nighthawk, like the BJ7138-04E, which has a slightly updated dial, but today we're going to look at one that I believe was released back in the 2000s. There were tons of different Promaster Nighthawk variants that were released back in the day. There were titanium variants, black ion plated variants, blue variants, brown variants, and so on. There's a post on the watch forum Watch You Seek that kind of breaks it all down, so I'll leave a link in the description if you want to have a read. What I have in front of me is the most common version of the Promaster Nighthawk, which is the BJ7000-52E. This is the American version of the black Promaster Nighthawk, and you can tell this because it has the word Nighthawk printed on the dial, whereas in the Asian variant, it's missing. So no unboxing today, unfortunately. I bought this watch from Japan using the proxy service from Japan, and the seller did not include the original box or any warranty or any instruction information. The only thing this watch came in was this very damaged cardboard box from FedEx. I don't know what happened to it during shipment, but it is pretty beaten up. I was actually quite worried that the watch would be damaged in transit, but it was wrapped in bubble wrap, so the watch did survive the shipping. Now moving on to the design, this watch looks like it's straight out of the dashboard of an aircraft. There's just so much going on with the dial, especially near the edges. You can see that there's a plethora of units, measurements, gauges, and who knows what else. Now apparently you're able to do calculations with this watch because you can rotate the bezel using a secondary crown at the 8 o'clock position, but I have no clue how to, and honestly, I don't really have a desire to learn. And like I said at the beginning, I usually don't like watches that have a busy dial because I feel like they can sometimes feel overwhelming and it can be hard to read the time. But this watch is an exception, and it's because Citizen made a smart design choice with this one. And that design choice is the fact that the inner part of the dial is relatively clean, and that, paired with the clearly legible hour markers and hands, means that you can actually read the time fairly easily. The same can't be said for some other Citizen pilot watches where the entire dial is just a complete cluster truck. What also helps with the legibility is the finishing of the dial. It's mostly a matte black finish with white markers, so it's pretty legible in most lighting conditions. A common complaint I have about watches with the shiny or glossy dial is that they reflect light in a way that makes it hard to read sometimes, but this watch doesn't have that problem. So overall, I actually quite like the design of this watch. It has a nice blend of both simplicity and complexity, but it's definitely one of the most complicated watches that I've owned so far. Moving on to the functionality, which is where this watch really shines, we've already talked about how this watch can do a bunch of different calculations and it tells the time pretty well. What you've probably also noticed is that it has a second hour hand that's supposed to be a 24-hour indicator. So let's say at 3 p.m. the hour hand would be here, but the secondary hand would show here, which is 15 o'clock. This also can function as a GMT hour hand, so right now it's tracking Japan's time zone, which is pretty useful since I'm always buying watches from Japan. Using it as a GMT hand is a little bit finicky because that second hour hand cannot be adjusted independently, and basically you gotta utilize the quick set time feature until you get the right combination of the 2 hour hands. Moving on to the date wheel at the 3 o'clock position, it's not really anything special, it's not a perpetual calendar or anything, but that's okay considering that this is a budget timepiece. Under the hood, this is powered by an equidrive movement, which is solar powered quartz. The power reserve is a few months long with your typical quartz watch accuracy. The movement is definitely a reliable workhorse. It's quite rare for these movements to fail, but the technology is still relatively new, so we'll have to see how equidrive holds up in 20, 30, or 40 years from now. The lume on this watch is very functional as it's been generously applied to the hour markers and the hands. I do wish it had some lume on the seconds hand like some other diver watches have. And speaking of which, here it is in comparison to the Seiko STBR021. In terms of brightness, I do think that the Seiko is a bit brighter, but it's also a newer watch, so it's possible that the lume on the Citizen is starting to degrade. I also decided to do a time lapse between the two, and you can see that after 20 minutes, the Seiko definitely has a lead over the Citizen. That's not to say that the Promaster Nighthawk has bad lume, but there's definitely watches under $500 that can do better than it. Remember near the start of the video where I said that the Promaster lineup are tool watches? Well, this watch definitely feels like a tool watch. Because not only does it have a useful set of features, it also feels like it's built to withstand anything. In fact, it feels so heavy and sturdy, I feel like I could just chuck it across the room right now and not feel too bad about it. Of course, I wouldn't actually do that. That feeling of being sturdy and well built is mainly because of the materials. Here we have a stainless steel case with a brushed finish, which makes the case look very tough and industrial. The case back is also made of stainless steel, with Citizen EcoDrive Nighthawk laser etched onto the back. For whatever reason, the American models have a laser etched back, while the non-US models have an embossed case back, which I think looks a lot nicer. I'm not sure why they did this, but maybe they just thought that Americans would like the laser etching more. Looking at the crystal, you can see that this is a flat mineral crystal, which I think was the right call here. If the crystal was raised too high, then this watch would look and feel way too big. Mineral crystal does mean that it's more scratch prone than sapphire crystal, and I've already noticed a few small scratches on this watch. So while I would have preferred to have sapphire crystal, I think mineral crystal is fine considering the price. And finally, the bracelet is very similar to the case in that it's brushed stainless steel, which makes it look and feel very hefty and sturdy. The dual locking clasp has nice satisfying clicks and will ensure that your watch won't accidentally unclasp itself. There's also 3 micro adjust holes that you can use to get the bracelet down to your ideal size. Now some Promaster Nighthawk models actually come with a leather strap, and actually the first time I bought this watch, it came with a third-party leather strap, but I feel like the metal bracelet is more fitting as a tool watch and it just makes it feel a lot more sturdy. Moving on to the size, we have 42mm in diameter, 47mm lug to lug, 22mm lugs, and 12.5mm in height. And I'll also add that the bracelet is 4mm in height, which is a little bit on the thicker side. This definitely isn't a small watch, but thanks to those shorter lugs, the lug to lug is only 47mm, which means that it isn't overwhelming in size. You can see that it does kind of fit my 6-inch wrists. The lugs are about to hang over the ends, and because this watch has slimmer bezels, the watch face does look quite large. That, combined with the heftiness of the watch, the thick bracelet, the 22mm lugs, and industrial design, I think this watch looks and feels just a little bit too big for my wrists. I think you would need at least a 6.5-inch wrist to handle this Promaster Nighthawk. And finally, moving on to the price and availability, this watch is discontinued now, so you can only find it in secondhand markets like watch forums and eBay, but the US model is quite common, so it's not too hard to find. I purchased this watch for about 150 Canadian dollars, which is around 115 US dollars, which is a little bit on the cheaper side because you can find these watches between 150 to 250 Canadian dollars, which is around 115 to 200 US dollars. Keep in mind that there's multiple variants of the Promaster Nighthawk and some are more rare than others, but overall this is in the budget territory of watches. So in conclusion, I do think that this is a good tool watch on a budget. The unique secondary GMT hand, the inner rotating bezel where you can do a bunch of flight calculations, the reliable eco-drive movement, the nice legible lume, all packaged in a very industrial looking design. I think it offers a lot for 150 Canadian dollars. So why did I buy this watch in 2019 and then sell it just a year later? Well, at the time, I felt that the watch was just too big and too heavy for my wrists. So why did I buy it again in 2022? Well, I kind of thought that maybe my wrist would have changed in size and maybe this would have fit better. But unfortunately, I still have the same issue. I think it's just a little bit too big for my wrists. It is nice that I was able to purchase this watch in the original bracelet, but that's not enough for me to change my mind, and this watch probably won't stay in my collection for that long. But if you are looking for a watch with those characteristics, then I do feel like the Citizen Promaster Nighthawk is a great candidate for only $100 to $200. So thank you everyone for watching my review of the Citizen Promaster Nighthawk. The next watch I'm reviewing is another Rolex Air King, so keep your eyes open for that. But until then, subscribe for more videos, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.